defense of Charlotte Mueller. I also like to welcome all people that are maybe following this meeting online. I'd like to open this academic ceremony in which Charlotte Mueller will defend her academic thesis, which is entitled Diaspora Return Visits for Knowledge Transfer and Capacity Development, a case study of IOMs connecting diaspora for development project in Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Somaliland. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis. The floor is yours, Charlotte.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry. Yes, I think you're seeing my screen in full screen mode now. Okay. Dear Pro-Rector, dear members of the Corona, dear family, friends, and colleagues, thank you for connecting and thank you for your interest in my doctoral research, which I will summarize in the next 15 minutes. I would like to start with a quote. Aiden totally changed the department. The ministry is new and the human resource department is also new. They're struggling to do so many things. So Aiden helped to do those things, to at least organize all staff of the ministry, even the regional staff, and make this filing system, establishing templates, work templates, etc. This is a quote from Ali, a manager at a ministry in Somaliland, about the placement that Aiden, a Diaspora member, conducted within his department. As part of the Diaspora Return program, I use as a case study. This was a placement where there was a high level of capacity development, which is the ideal scenario in these programs and which isn't the case for all placements. The extent to which migration, including return, contributes to or hinders development in migrants' countries of origin has been subject to intense debate. Optimistic views have highlighted the positive impacts of return migration on development through innovation, new knowledge, and additional skills. Pessimistic views have criticized some of the underlying assumptions, highlighting the role of immigration control, the notions of development embedded in the most recent optimistic turn, and the role of structural conditions in countries of origin. Despite the vast body of case studies produced in recent decades, empirical evidence remains inconsistent when it comes to return migration's impact on development. As a result of optimistic interpretations, governments and international organizations have, for several decades now, used different forms of diaspora return programs. The programs aim to channel the potential attributed to diaspora members or migrants from developing countries in order to increase local expertise, knowledge, and thereby contribute to sustainable development. This is done through return visits, that is, stays of a few weeks a month in the country of origin, after which diaspora members return to their country of residence. These diaspora return programs take place within the broader context of efforts by international organizations and governments to enhance contributions by diasporas. This includes the Global Forum on Migration and Development, a state-led, informal, and non-binding process which helps shape the global debate on migration and development. Diaspora has been included several times and is a thematic priority again this year as part of the current chairmanship. Despite the popularity, these return visits have not been sufficiently researched and theorized. My dissertation contributes to the literature on return migration and development by deepening our understanding of diaspora members' contributions to knowledge transfer and capacity development during these visits. For my dissertation, I used the Connecting Diaspora for Development project as a case study. The CD4D project is the most recent short-term diaspora return program operated by the International Organization for Migration, and it has been financed by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I used data from CD4D placements during the first phase of the project from 2016 to 2019 in Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Somaliland. With my dissertation, I proposed a conceptual framework for knowledge transfer and capacity development during diaspora return visits. This framework sets the basis for furthering understanding how knowledge transfer and capacity development take place in this context. The existing literature has discussed many different aspects of diaspora return visits, knowledge transfer, and capacity development, but the value of the framework lies in its combining the different aspects into one overarching framework. It includes 3 processes: information transmission, knowledge creation, and contributions to organizational capacity development. Information transmission is the process whereby knowledge senders share new information, insights with the knowledge receivers. Knowledge creation is the process whereby the knowledge receivers process and utilize the transmitted information, which results in individual capacity development. The third process is contributions to organization capacity development, which is the process whereby the diaspora member contributes to the internal structure, policies, procedures, and resources of the host institution in which the return visit takes place. Based on these 3 processes, I then distinguish 3 levels of capacity development: high, medium, and low. These processes then also build the basis for analyzing the factors that enable and inhibit knowledge transfer capacity development. Each of these levels is examined for the 3 processes, as different enablers and inhibitors play a role in each of these processes. Based on the conceptual framework, my first empirical chapter examined knowledge transfer capacity development. The results show that there's evidence of all 3 processes, but information transmission is much more common than the other 2 processes. Based on these results, I then analyzed the 3 levels of capacity development. Of the 33 placements, 8 showed high capacity development, 18 medium, and 7 low. This shows that diaspora members can make valuable contributions to the host institutions, but also that capacity development is not at the ideal level. Placements with high capacity development address knowledge gaps at the host institution and strengthen the quality of host institution staff. This helps staff to do their work more effectively and may allow them to continue applying their knowledge and maintain contributions to organizational capacity development in the long term. In contrast, placement with medium capacity development only partially addressed host institutions' capacity gaps, and those with low capacity development failed to do so. In chapter 7, I then analyzed which combination of factors between the diaspora member, host institution staff, and the overall context create the optimal conditions for knowledge transfer and capacity development. This shows the different relevance of these 3 levels for the 3 processes. While information transmission is influenced by individual and group level factors, knowledge creation mostly depends on group and contextual level factors, and contributions to capacity development are affected by all 3. For example, the occurrence of interaction enables or inhibits information transmission, while the frequency of interaction between diaspora members and host institution staff enables or inhibits knowledge creation. The ease of the relationship between diaspora members and host institution staff is one factor that influences the frequency of interaction between them. The analysis presented in the 3rd empirical chapter shows that diaspora members experience different forms of returnee stigma. The most common stigma is that diaspora members impose a threat to local jobs. Diaspora members have a high awareness of stigma, and many therefore employ counteractive and preventive strategies which contribute to the ease of relationships. These include adapting to the country and its culture, signaling commonality, approachability, and respect, and 3rd, addressing stereotypes, labels, and misconceptions. My research is relevant to academia and policy. It makes 3 contributions to the literature on return migration and development. It proposes a framework for capacity development and knowledge transfer. Second, it theorizes return visits for knowledge transfer as a distinct type of return visit. And 3rd, it adds empirical evidence on these visits. Efforts to increase the effectiveness of diaspora return programs should focus on increasing the share of placements that lead to knowledge creation. This could be done in 7 ways. First, pre-departure training that prepare the diaspora members to act as knowledge centers and how to react to stigma. Second, informing all staff of a host institution about the project before the arrival of the diaspora member. Agreeing with host institutions to allow host institution staff to dedicate time to work with the diaspora member while he or she is at the host institution. Fourth, ensuring the relevance of the diaspora members' activities to the staff's work. Providing targeted support for organizational resources. Ensuring a focus on knowledge transfer during all placements through the terms of reference. And last, adjusting expectations of the outcomes of placement based on that length. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Charlotte. I'd like to open the opposition now. The first question will be asked by Ronald Skelton. He's a professor in human geography, and he is based at the University of Sussex and also at Maastricht University, UNU Merit. So please, Ronald, go ahead.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, I want to congratulate you on the completion of your dissertation. I think that it now reads much better than before and is much more integrated. And I'm sure that all the committee members will agree that you've been extremely successful in this restructuring. Now, the structure of your thesis is not the thrust of my question, although you might like to reflect a little upon whether the reworking of the dissertation, and it was a major reworking, gave you a different perspective on your data and interpretations. But let me leave that to one side. My question relates to the whole nature of your research, which derives from a request made by IOM to UNU Merit to assess the success or otherwise of its project connecting diaspora for development. In other words, what you're presenting is an example of applied research. And I wonder if you could outline for us the strengths and weaknesses of an academic research project that specifically evaluates the work of a donor agency, and at the national and international levels. Now, clearly, there are going to be strengths, access to certain sources of information. But what are the weaknesses? Tensions between academic integrity and institutional approaches, conflicts of interests, and so on. I guess what I am also asking is whether by focusing specifically on the objectives of a project, whether these have been successful or not, you might have somehow lost sight of the broader developmental implications. But of course, that focus, that restricted focus, might also have been a strength. So I just wonder about those tensions in your research. Thank you.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your comments and your question. You were asking, you already mentioned the strength themselves, and obviously, I mean, one of the main strengths of doing research in this way and doing this kind of applied research is really getting access to information that would otherwise wouldn't have access to. At the same time, you're completely right. I agree. There are some weaknesses in this approach as well, and there are some conflicts of interest. Obviously, in this case, IOM has an interest in showing success in the placements and showing that the program works. At the same time, what I'm looking at my thesis, I'm looking at whether the success of knowledge transfer, right? And I'm not looking at the success of the project as such. So I'm not directly here looking at the objectives of I mean, obviously, the objective of the project is knowledge transfer, but I think I'm really looking beyond that. And I think what I really show in my thesis is that there is a lot of nuance, and only few placements are successful in the way, and there are a lot of placements that only show medium success, and there are some that that have low levels of capacity development. So I think this kind of nuance does show the added value of research, and also I think demonstrates in some way the independence of my research, because even though I collected the data through an evaluation, obviously still, I mean, in the field, at least like designing the interview guides and planning the research, I mean, this was done by me together with colleagues. So this was still, to the extent possible, independent from IOM and the organization implementing the research. So obviously, even though there is a conflict of interest, I think there's still some room and to maintain that independence, and I think I do demonstrate that throughout my research.
Pro-Rector, I've got a few minutes. Could I just follow that up briefly? How has IOM responded to your research?
So I haven't received a direct response to the thesis, because again, we've also kept these processes kind of independent, because for the evaluation, I was the first author for several evaluation reports, and then separately I wrote my thesis. And they did have a look at the first draft of my thesis, but I haven't received specific feedback on the second draft.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, then the opposition will now be continued by Catherine Marchand. She's a researcher at UNU Merit and also affiliated with Maastricht University. So Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Charlotte, I'm so happy to see you here today, and congratulations on your very relevant and interesting work that we were now able to read. I very much enjoyed, like Ron said, reading the second version of the monograph that it is now, and I really value the contribution that the analysis of the diaspora return visits and knowledge transfers that you have shown in this thesis make to the literature, but also, of course, to the practice of these programs. So thank you for that. And of course, reading your work also raised some questions and thoughts. So I really appreciate the distinction that you make with the three processes, which you also again highlighted in your framework now in the presentation. And I wonder in the first part of the conceptual framework where you outline these processes about the different levels that you show there. So you have the individual level in terms of individual capacity development, and then the organizational capacity development. But in your framework, they don't seem to be linked. And I wonder about this, this link, whether there is a link or whether it's not relevant in your case. So while I understand that the focus of your research obviously is on the role of the diaspora member, I do wonder about the role of the host institution staff in the success of these programs. So you just outlined again in your kind of conclusion in terms of recommendations that the host staff members need to be informed, and that they also need to have time to work with a diaspora member. Is this sufficient? Or maybe to be a bit more specific with an example, to what extent can and should the contributions to organizational capacity development, which is one of your processes, really lie on the shoulders of the diaspora member? Or would it actually be more practical if this is linked to the individual capacity development of the staff members? And in your view, is there room for the diaspora members to facilitate this rather than doing it themselves? And what might be the advantages of this, and how could this be achieved?
Esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your comments and your questions. I think I heard about 3 questions within that, so I'm going to try to answer all 3. So first of all, you were commenting on the link between individual and organization capacity development. And I mean, I do distinguish between these 3 processes of information transmission, knowledge creation, and contributions to organization capacity development. So first of all, here also making clear a look at contributions to organization capacity development, acknowledging that really that real organization capacity development depends on more than the diaspora member, and it really doesn't lie within their sphere of influence within these return programs. And then with regards to link between them, yes, they're in some way independent, because what I've seen, and I think what I showed throughout my thesis as well, that there can be placements where there are contributions to organization capacity development, but we don't see any information transmission and knowledge creation. At the same time, what I show in my thesis is that with placements that have high levels of capacity development, they have information transmission, knowledge creation can be accompanied by contributions to organization capacity development. And here, even though these processes are not directly linked, the contributions to organization capacity development can complement the knowledge transfer process, because it means that there are actually already some changes with regards to policies, with regards to structures, with regards to resources taking place and being promoted by the diaspora member at the host institution, and they go hand in hand with the knowledge transfer process. Then you were asking about the role of host institution staff, and I mean, in my conceptual framework, I do have these three levels of the individual, of the group, and of the context. And so there, the host institution staff has a prominent role in that sense that, I mean, I do take them into account in the individual level. So, and then for looking at the different processes of knowledge transfer and capacity development for the host institution staff, one thing that I see that matters is the motivation that they have to learn from a diaspora member. And that is something that is very individual, of course. And obviously this can be promoted by the host institution in some way, or incentivized by the host institution. It can also, what I've also seen in my research, that here it makes a difference whether host institution staff is actually informed, and that was one of my policy recommendations. So that makes them more likely to actually want to work with the diaspora member. Or if they're not informed, it could increase tensions between them and diaspora member. Then, I mean, another factor that I take into account is the time that host institution staff have for knowledge transfer and capacity development, which is again also something that is not just individual. It's obviously an individual decision whether someone wants to allocate time to work with the diaspora member or not. And we see that this is then often really on the also, yeah, it can be an individual decision, but at the same time, it also depends whether the host institution really makes room for this. So I think this kind of shows really the role that the host institution staff also has in this process. And then with your point of should we really put the responsibility only on the diaspora member? I think, maybe I could have made this point more clearer throughout my thesis as well, but I think with the distinction with these different levels, I really show that it's not just, doesn't just depend on the diaspora members, but it depends on this whole set of factors. So I think this really shows this kind of nuance. And yes, I would say there is a need for kind of taking a bit the responsibility of the diaspora member. And I mean, one recommendation that I've made on this is also making an explicit reference to knowledge transfer within the TOR, making this a responsibility of the diaspora member, but at the same time also, I mean, the TORs in these programs are generally written with the host institution, so that that then gives also room to putting more the responsibility on host institution staff, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will continue now the opposition by another member of the assessment committee. That's Dr. Carrie Oppen. She's a senior lecturer in human geography, specialized in migration studies, and affiliated with University of Sussex. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, thank you for a wonderful thesis that I really enjoyed reading. Fascinating empirical information, but also a very clear framework and very clear policy relevance as well. On the line of relevance and policy relevance, I'd like to ask a question about your recommendation in Chapter 7 that these programs give preference to candidates who don't necessarily need it as a job opportunity or as something to add to their CV. I'd like to hear your reflections on what implications that would have for the type of people who applied, whether they would get enough candidates if they did that, what the pros and cons of that approach would be.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your comments and question. So you were asking about the recommendations Chapter 7, which relates to the selecting only giving a preference to diaspora members who are employed. This really stems from the finding that I've seen that this makes a difference for the motivation, and it's kind of linked to the motivation, because I mean in my research I distinguish three motivations. I see that the participation can be driven by altruistic, non-altruistic, and mixed motivations. And I do see that at least mixed motivation, or ideally altruistic motivations, are necessary for success of the placements. And so here, then I see, because there's actually quite some share, as you note, of diaspora members who are unemployed, and especially, I mean, not only unemployed, but already living in the country of origin, before participating in the program. And I mean, this was kind of in this program, from a practical perspective, this was done as an exception. And I think it was really done because there isn't enough capacity, because an issue of these programs also, I mean, there is kind of a double geographic focus, because on the one hand, diaspora members need to be from the Netherlands or another European country. They need to reside there, and they need to have the nationality. They need to be from one of the target countries. And then at the same time, they need to have the skills for the placement, right? So this makes it very specific who can be selected for that. And yes, I would say from what I've seen, this is really a measure to find more qualified people to complete these placements. But at the same time, I mean, from an academic perspective, and from what my research shows, it's not ideal, just because it doesn't lead to the ideal outcomes.
Thank you, dear candidate, and I'll follow up on that if I may, as I have a little of time. I wanted to ask your reflections or how you identified altruistic, mixed, not altruistic. And the reason I ask that is because I think it's the people who might say that they're being altruistic actually have mixed motivations. So where did you draw the line there?
Esteemed opponent, again, thank you for your question. Yes, and this is something that was indeed a bit challenging in the research. That obviously in my interview guide, I did include a question where I asked about the motivations of diaspora members. But as you rightly mentioned, I mean, especially, and that's again a bit of backdrop of doing this within the context of an evaluation, they might not be completely honest, because they obviously frame their motivation within within the context of what they're supposed to do within the program. At the same time, I mean, I did ask that question, and I felt that sometimes I did get very nuanced answers to that, with people acknowledging on the one side mentioning altruistic motivations, but at the same time also acknowledging other types of motivation. I then, for the analysis, I further also proceeded to not only look at what respondents answered to that one specific question, but I also took into account other throughout the interview, other aspects that they mentioned. And because there were often sections when they, again, motivation came in, so basically I did analyze these different aspects, so also bring that in more indirectly, which is obviously a subjective process, but I mean that's part of doing qualitative analysis. So I think this helped to bring in this nuance, but that was also part of the reason why I included mixed motivations, because it's more nuanced than either altruistic or non-altruistic motivations.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Then I will now continue with the opposition inviting Hildegard Schneider to ask a question. She is a professor of European migration law and affiliated with Maastricht University. Hildegard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Yes, I would like to join my colleagues to congratulate you, candidate, with this interesting book, which I really read with great interest and pleasure. I do have directly also a couple of questions, which might also be, as I'm not so informed in the issue concerning the return migration literature, is the project as such, because you mentioned, and you repeated it here again, that the diaspora members had to be have Dutch nationality. You mentioned that many of them, at least the absolute majority of them, on page 24. Of the 53, I think, involved in the project, 46 were Dutch, and the other one were 5 had Belgium, French, or UK nationality, so this double nationality. Now, I was wondering if, and insofar I go back a little bit what Ronald Skeldon said, and that's the ethical issue on the project. If the object of the project is transfer in knowledge to the areas of concern, in how far has one taken into account when formulating the project also the interest of the diaspora members? Because I felt, at least when reading it, that their position could to some extent be endangered, their legal position from that perspective, their residence position, their position concerning social security concerns, pension rights. So I'm a little bit wondering, specifically because the Dutch government is paying partially to this project, what is now the political idea behind this project? Because if the object of the project is transfer of knowledge and capacity development, a mixed group of people, not only diaspora members, but a mixed, might have been as successful. So is it in the end return policy which is indicating this by the IOI to help return policies, even if these participants have European citizenships?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your comments on your question. So you were asking about the nationality and also the political context and the motivations behind that, and how that fits within return policies. And first of all, I mean, this has been part of Dutch development policy. And so these these visits are also, I mean, their main characteristics are really that they are voluntary. So, and this is a huge difference to other aspects of return policy, that diaspora members apply to participate in these visits. And then they're planned in that sense that IOM supports them administratively and financially for the duration of their visits. So this also means that some of these concerns that you raised with regards to residents in the Netherlands and social security, they have actually been considered, and I think I do mention that in the introduction of my thesis, they have been considered in the program design, to the extent that the length of visits is planned in a way that diaspora members don't risk losing their residence, or don't risk having problems with social security or any other benefits there. Because also, I mean, what they receive for their visits financially is a stipend, and it's not, I mean, because these visits is not an employment, but it's kind of this voluntary work which is remunerated because they do have certain expenses, and some people might also have to take time up from work. But yeah, so this, and it happens as part of, it used to happen as part of Dutch development policy.
Yeah, I'm a little bit suspicious on that, knowing the Dutch government's development policy or migration policy for a long time. And because if I see it correctly, I think it was stimulated that at least conducted stays of at least 90 days or around 188 days. This could be on the long, for some of them, problematic. And my question is, if the objective is Dutch development policy or development policy in general, and we have the stigmatization perhaps of at home by the countries of origin, would a mixed group be more successful perhaps on the end?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you again for your question. I do understand what you're getting at, and I mean, this is something that I've obviously thought about through my research, and this is also something that from time to time has come up during my visits to Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, Somaliland, that I actually see that from the point of view from host institutions, I mean, they not necessarily have a preference for having a diaspora member, but what they most need is having someone who is most qualified. So, I mean, obviously with my research, I can't make a statement on whether someone who's not a diaspora member would be better suited to do this. But from the skills perspective, I think there would be an advantage to actually have people who are not necessarily diaspora members participating in the programs. At the same time, yes, diaspora members face returning stigma, but also they do have, and I think my research also shows that very clearly, they do have familiarity with their countries of origin in many cases that, let's say, a Dutch person, a German person, someone else is not going to have in the same way. So this does suggest an advantage in that sense. Also, language-wise, I mean, a very practical issue. Language-wise, being able to speak, and this was also something that I discuss in my thesis. I mean, establishing this relationship with host institution staff, often their language plays a role because it enables this more informal conversation, this connection between people. And this is something that obviously, I mean, there are diaspora members who don't necessarily speak the language, but many do. And there are these advantages then of working with diaspora members. And also, I mean, obviously, diaspora knowledge transfer is not just happening through these programs, but it's clear that this is also happening in a lot more informal ways. So it kind of like, you know, these programs kind of harness this and kind of give this managed space to make that happen and create this specific environment.
Thank you.
Okay, the next opponent in this meeting will be Michaela van Ora. She is a researcher and affiliated with UNU Merit, based at Maastricht. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Charlotte, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to learn more about the work that you've done and have the chance to discuss it today. It's exciting, of course, to see this moment finally come after so many years of you working on this topic and disentangling the many complexities of it. I really appreciated that you developed a specific conceptual framework for the sake of this PhD that adapted the literature to the specific contexts that are involved in the CD4D program. Of course, you know that I'm now on the team that has taken up evaluation of the CD4D program, and we are now in phase 2 with the potential phase 3 being planned. Of course, that gives me a little bit of a sneaky proprietary knowledge, let's say, about how CD4D works and maybe about the mechanisms through which it works or does not. What I find really interesting is that we've been, of course, talking to diaspora experts, host institutions, and so on, and something that's come up pretty consistently is that not every diaspora expert who is ostensibly placed to actually transfer knowledge is equally capable of doing so, as not every diaspora expert or any professional more generally is an equally capable teacher. And this made me think about the types of literature that you've also consulted and that it informed your thinking. I was quite surprised, actually, that in your literature review, which you used to build up your conceptual framework, that you largely focus on, let's say, the perspective from migration studies. So, of course, the scholars who are writing from migration studies perspective tend to focus on the actor, the migrant, rather than on the act of that is transferring knowledge. Then on the other hand, you have the literature that comes from more the business and knowledge management field, which does focus a little bit more on the act of knowledge transfer, but not necessarily on how knowledge is internalized. And that's made me think quite a lot, actually, about the sustainability of knowledge and impacts of knowledge. I was also thinking about how theories of education and learning fit into the discussion and inform our expectations about how knowledge transfer occurs. So I have a bit of a cheating, let's say, 3-in-1 question. So the first one is, let's imagine that you were extending your framework and that you were trying to explain any kind of normal knowledge transfer. So the normal transfer of knowledge or information that happens in day-to-day activities of two colleagues who are working together in an institution, regardless of whether or not they are considered diaspora or otherwise. And then let's take this thinking exercise a step further and think about if you have knowledge transfer and capacity building that happens in an educational setting. Let's say in the last year of a bachelor program where somebody is being prepared for actual work, for entering the labor market. Do you think your conceptual framework would apply the same way? And why I'm asking it is that I've been thinking a lot about what is unique about the diaspora as transfer agents, about the knowledge that is being transmitted by diaspora, and about the nature of the recipient. And then in turn, what these characteristics actually mean about the sustainability of knowledge. Again, I recognize this is a lot of questions bundled into one, but I'm looking forward to your reflections on this whole element of actually, let's say, knowledge, training, and learning.
Esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your comments and your questions. First of all, yes, I focus a lot on the literature for migration studies, but then I think, and especially for my conceptual framework, my main focus is on literature from knowledge management. And here it really brings in, and I mean, one aspect, as you were saying, with the that you're seeing now in the evaluation of the second phase of CD4D, with the aspect of this teaching capacity. I mean, I think this is very much encompassed in the disseminative capacity that I included as one component in the framework. And this is something that really stems from the knowledge management literature and hasn't been discussed that much in the migration studies literature. And this is definitely one aspect, because when you're saying a normal transfer, so a transfer, I assume you mean a transfer between someone who's not a diaspora member to someone at the host institution. I mean, this is something that also plays a role, right? Because it matters the extent to which someone is experienced in teaching and transferring knowledge, because disseminative capacity really means bringing knowledge across in a way that the receiver, in this case, the host institution staff, understands it and also is able to apply it. And this is also why I see the importance of disseminative capacity for knowledge creation, which is really the stage where the knowledge receivers apply the knowledge, right, and not just receive information. And so, I mean, this is definitely a factor which I would say also plays a role in normal transfer. I mean, other aspects also, for instance, the expertise that I see plays a role for information transmission, but also contributions to organization capacity development. This also plays a role in normal transfers, right? Independent of whether this is a diaspora member or not. And I think also these aspects of motivation, and also maybe thinking about educational settings, the motivation of the ones receiving the knowledge of, for instance, university students, and also the motivation of the teacher, of the lecturer, do play a role. And these are factors that I've included in the conceptual framework. And because you're alluding to educational settings, I mean, what I did see in my research across the different countries, there were some differences. In Somaliland. It was mainly basically all host institutions were ministries, while in Sierra Leone it was a mix between ministries and higher education institutions. And then in Ethiopia, it was mostly higher education institutions. And there, I do see some differences also in the knowledge transfer methods that are being used. Formal training is something, I mean, I think it's this in the sense that it's very common in the educational setting, obviously through trainings and lectures. So I do see this then they're being applied maybe somewhat more fluidly than it is in the other settings. So yeah, I think that kind of also relates to the educational settings.
Thank you. And can you please reflect a little bit on sustainability of knowledge? So what within your conceptual framework, let's say, predicts or addresses the sustainability of knowledge, maybe the factors that will actually ensure that knowledge actually remains, that it's not just information that is being acquired, but knowledge?
Esteemed opponent, thanks again for your question. Yes, with regards to sustainability, and I mean, I do mention that at different points throughout my thesis. I mean, I do have a limitation on with regards to sustainability, because I mean, the interviews that I conducted were when at the end of the project, when the project was still going on, and ideally future research, and this is something that you might be doing at the moment, would look at this also from a longer term perspective. I mean, ideally, we would look at this in also a 5 or 10 year time frame to really be able to assess sustainability. But I mean, my results do give some indications with regard to sustainability. And what really comes in there is this differentiation between the three processes of information transmission, knowledge creation, and contributions to organization and capacity development, and then on which then the distinction between high, medium, and low is based. And I mean, I do see that the majority, so out of the 33 placements, 18 have medium capacity development, only a few have high. And for sustainability, I mean, the ideal scenario is the high capacity development placements, because host institution staff has received the knowledge, they have already started to apply it, and I mean, it's not guaranteed, but there is a chance that they are going to be able to continue to apply it in the future. And also because in the cases where contribution to organization capacity development happened linked to these knowledge transfer processes, when staff has gained knowledge about these processes, they may be able to maintain them. While I see with placement of medium and low capacity development, I mean, with low capacity development, there's basically nothing to maintain. And then with medium capacity development, also because staff hasn't been able to apply the information, the insights that they gain for different reasons, either because there weren't the resources to do so, or the information wasn't relevant, for instance, then, I mean, this is obviously difficult to maintain. So this is really a risk to sustainability. Another sustainability aspect that I've seen throughout my research in the 3 countries is that there is quite frequent staff turnover in these host institutions. So, I mean, this was also a practical aspect in my research. What I tried is obviously to follow up with staff over the different periods during my different visits to see how this evolved. But I could see that often staff either changed positions within the same institution or then left to another institution, and especially if staff who has acquired knowledge leaves the institution, this is not guarantee sustainability, especially because, I mean, in my research, you can see that there were between 1 and 8 colleagues that I interviewed for each placement. And then, I mean, often the number of colleagues who then actually work with the diaspora member was a bit larger, but in some instances there were placements where there was only 1 or maximum 2 staff members working with a diaspora member. So when they leave the host institution, I mean, they might be able to apply their knowledge somewhere else, and this might then still be beneficial from a development perspective, but obviously for the host institution, that benefit is then lost.
Okay, thank you very much for this answer. I would like to now continue the opposition by asking Arjen Leerkens to come forward. He's a professor at Erasmus University and also at UNU Merit Maastricht. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, I also want to congratulate you with this, I think, great book. I really enjoyed reading it. I think it has a very good section also where you discuss the history of our thinking on return and development, and also a good conceptualization of diasporas, and of course fieldwork in all these different countries where I think a lot of people would be jealous about. But of course I have a more critical question. So my question relates about context. It relates to context. Also in your theoretical model, you say that context can be an impediment or can facilitate certain outcomes of the program. And thinking about context, what I was missing a bit in your work is the realization, and this also adds a little bit to some of the previous comments also by Professor Schneider and perhaps also Professor Skelden on the suspicion, the mixed motives, the altruism, the political purposes of these programs. What I was missing a little bit is reflection that these programs take place in a context where governments in the global north increasingly try to use development aid to incentivize and legitimate collaboration by non-EU countries, poor countries in the global south on immigration control. We know one example is the European Trust Funds for Africa, for example, which was also paid for from development aid. It's also used to externalize immigration control, making it harder for people to reach Europe. Other attempts also in the Netherlands in the past, the reintegration support that IMN gives was increased through government funding from the foreign affairs, using development aid, for example. And also, I think for this program, you could, I think there are indications that it's used also for that agenda. For example, what I also learned in one of my own projects recently is that IOM does use this program, CD4D, or at least it helps them to improve the relationships also with countries of origin and to create more goodwill on their part, which they can then also use for when they apply for laissez-passer, for example, for voluntary return. Well, IOM is not involved in forced return, but also for voluntary return, which is then may include rejected asylum seekers. So it's a little bit different story than the people you're talking about, who are residence permit holders or naturalized migrants. Yeah? So within this context, and I think it has been described also in the literature, that there's this increased linkage between development aid and immigration control policies. Why do we read why do we read so little about it in your dissertation? That's one question. And does it relate perhaps also to your position? Because IOM also asked you to evaluate this. And then also, but also more importantly, how could it impact the findings, the operation of this program, that it occurs in this context? Does it affect the outcomes? And by implication, should it also maybe affect your suggestions, your policy suggestions?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your comment and your question. And I do recognize that this is an important point, and I could have maybe acknowledged that further in my thesis. I do discuss that also in the literature review, because I mean, obviously this is an aspect that has been really discussed in this debate around the migration and development nexus, that these optimistic assumptions are often framed by the interest of the global north and by immigration control, which is I mean, and obviously, I mean, these projects don't happen in isolation from that, and they do happen in parallel to a lot of other activities with regards to voluntary return or other support after deportation that IOM does. And also, I mean, the agenda of the Dutch government has been shifting much more towards immigration control, and more moving away from supporting these type of projects, also not recognizing diaspora anymore as a separate group, but including them more broadly and broader development policy. So to answer your question, why do we read so little about it? Yes, I think I could have brought that in further, but I think the link is there. And how does this impact these? I mean, obviously, I think it does influence these programs, but at the same time, I mean, there is kind of a fine balance here also, that I mean, these implementing organizations do, because yes, it helps them to improve the relationship with the country of origin, but at the same time, there's also a risk that they risk the relationship that they do have to the diaspora communities in the Netherlands and also in other European countries, because I mean, diaspora communities are quite skeptical then when it comes to these topics of immigration control. So that really stands in harsh contrast. So I think what my research shows is and makes these contributions possible.
Yeah, if you want, you can elaborate more on answering the question, but if you are okay at the moment, then it's also fine, of course.
I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Charlotte Mueller, the time appointed for defending the thesis is now passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. And I would like to ask you and your company to wait for the results of our deliberations, and we will return, and then we hope we're still there. Yeah, thank you so much. See you later.
Thank you. See you then.
Microsoft haben wir jetzt gemacht, und dann hat sie die Stickers geschrieben und mit dem Pass mal die Blüten holen gegangen und dann haben wir das aufgesetzt. Dann haben wir den gegangen, das schönste mal ein Tier, der Tiersparmer, und der hat gesagt, wenn wir nicht klauen wollen, dann haben wir Tier klauen gesagt. Und haben wir so dann der Bau, das ist der was Trips hat, wo ich da das einmal an der Hand sind und die verhören, wo gehen die Rufen hin? Ja, na, Auto tun wir schauen, Autos sind wir, bin ich beschäftigt, ja. So, Ford C-Max, wo wir eigentlich die Frage ist, das war, ja, wo einfach 35 sind, das einfach nichts größere Variante. Und das war dann wirklich gekauft. Ein Gespräch haben wir mit. Was? Vollgas. Für Vollgas. Jetzt ist aber jetzt die Vorgelegenheit, dass dann runter ein bisschen mehr was tun, alles verwachst und verwühlt. Und na, überhaupt nicht, ja. Dazwischen. Sicherlich. Wie geht's mit der Tante Renata? Wie geht's mit der Tante Renata?
thesis and your defense. And in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Siegel is now authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. And I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Yes, first, I have to ask you a question. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
And by the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present online, I hereby confer upon you, Charlotte Mueller, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, you will soon receive the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the supervisors, and affixed with the official seal of the university, shown by the beadle right now. Now I will turn the floor over to the co-supervisor, Dr. Kushminder, to say a few words.
Dear Dr. Mueller, congratulations on this significant achievement. And it really has been a significant achievement. This was a PhD plus an evaluation, plus zones, excellently managed collaboration with international organizations, conducted hundreds of interviews, and sent thousands of emails and follow-ups to research respondents. You worked on the project and wrote several reports and updates for IOM, communicating difficult research results and finding collaborative solutions. You always did this with the utmost professionalism and organization to keep everything on track and smoothly moving along, which was a lot of work. In addition to all of this, you created your own conceptual framework for diaspora knowledge transfer and capacity development about an original thesis that adds value to academia and society. You refined this thesis with determination and dedication while working full-time for the United Nations Development Program over the past 2 years. The result has been an excellent piece of work that is highly relevant today in the global diaspora and development dialogues and in initiatives to increase skills and capacity in multiple countries around the world. The committee has agreed that you have done a really good job on your final thesis. Charlotte, you started this PhD as a student directly out of your bachelor's and master's degree in your early 20s. When I first met you and we considered this PhD position, you were really unsure about if you wanted to do this. You took on a tremendous amount of responsibility for your career stage and you handled it all with poise. You complete this PhD now as a professional, working for the United Nations as a valued and skilled expert on migration and diaspora. Through this PhD plus, you have grown and changed, developing several skill sets that will undoubtedly lead you to many further achievements in your career. To you, to your fortitude, your poise, your own capacity development over this PhD trajectory. You already are, but it's now time for you to be the one leading knowledge transfer processes and sharing your skills and expertise with others. I wish you much success in what I'm sure will be a meaningful and successful professional career path. Congratulations, Dr. Mueller.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Dear Dr. Mueller, also on behalf of the Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree that you have just acquired. And I hereby declare this ceremony ended. Congratulations, Charlotte, you deserve it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. So I understand it's very early for you at the moment.
Yes, it's now 7:20. When I logged in, it was 5:30. That's why it was still dark.
Okay, wow. And you are in Ecuador at the moment?
Yes, I live in Quito, Ecuador. Yeah,
Wow.
so that's why we have 7 hours of time difference with the